Hello there, welcome to Planet America's Situation Room. I'm John Barron.
I'm Licciardello, and you guessed it, we've got another situation.
Cuba's foreign minister says his country is under direct threat of military aggression by the U.S.
A collapse of the communist island could be imminent.
Cuba's in a lot of trouble.
Is Cuba prepared to strike U.S. targets?
Is Trump really planning to attack Cuba, claiming the island poses a threat to America?
And Don's party planning. Not going so well. But first.
And first, to the midterm race that could have a huge impact on the balance of power in Washington and Trump's final 2 years in office. Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton easily won the Republican Senate primary runoff election over incumbent John Cornyn last week. It was a close race until about 2 weeks ago when Paxton secured the endorsement of President Trump.
The bottom line is this: if Donald Trump wants you to be the nominee of the Republican Party for virtually any office, he can will it into existence.
It's a bit much, isn't it? I'm not sure Trump did anything but jump in front of the parade and act like he was leading it. I mean, Paxton was consistently leading in the polling averages at least, even without Trump. Just look at the early votes, for example. Now, they were largely submitted before Trump's Paxton endorsement, yet still, that resulted in large leads for Paxton.
Ken Paxton, John Cornyn, and 81,000 for Paxton so far, 51,000. So what are those numbers representing? Bottom line is this is all early voting numbers that are coming in.
That's a big lead. In fact, I'd say Trump's biggest assistance to Paxton was desensitizing the electorate to corruption so that someone with Paxton's track record could still be a viable candidate.
You might be right there. Paxton is certainly controversial, though. He was impeached by the Republican-controlled Texas State House on multiple charges of abuse of office. His own senior staffers reported him to the FBI, alleging he illegally used his position to help a prominent donor. And his wife, a state senator, filed for divorce last year on biblical grounds, citing adultery. And that trial is coming up in the next few weeks, which is why, from the get-go, old Ken has set about trying to tear down his Democratic rival. This is the seemingly squeaky clean James Talarico.
This is Texas. This is not.
The American flag is such a complicated symbol for most of us.
This is Texas. This is not.
They're going to call me a radical leftist.
This is Texas. This is not.
Something that you love that's not family or friends.
I love, I'm just saying this because it's on my mind, the trans children.
It's quite the pile-on. White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller has claimed that the Democrats made history in Texas by nominating their first transgender Senate candidate. James Talarico identifies as male, not transgender. He's a Texas state representative. He's a former middle school teacher and a Presbyterian seminarian. The Democratic Party's official social media account took exception to Stephen Miller's post, telling him to
shut up, you ugly fuck.
And then Miller's wife, Katie, a podcaster who was briefly press secretary to Vice President Mike Pence, took to Fox News to stand by her man.
This is the same violent political rhetoric that is leading people to shooting up, whether it be the White House Correspondents' Dinner or President Trump and Butler.
Really? Meanwhile, Ken Paxton himself is not above a bit of name-calling.
He goes by a few names that you may all have heard of. Some people know him as Tofu Talarico. Some people call him Six-Gender Jimmy. I've even heard some people call him James Talarico. And others refer to him simply as Low T Talarico.
Low T meaning low testosterone. As for the Trumpian nickname Talafrico, well, the Democrats are trying to reclaim that already, selling Talafrico T-shirts.
Making a joke out of it? Not a bad idea, I reckon, John. It is important, though, to understand the context of all this. It's not just that Ken Paxton is an appalling candidate, it's also that the polling suggests the Democrats are in with a real shot in Texas this year. The closest the Democrats have gotten to winning a statewide contest in Texas for 2 decades was with Beto O'Rourke back in 2018. Now, he only lost by 2.6 points. And at this point in time, back in 2018, the Democrats were up nationally by about 6 points. That was the environment. Right now, the Democrats are up by 6 to 7 points. So that seems pretty promising for Democrats. And another thing that's similar to 2018 is polling amongst Hispanics. The latest New York Times polling has Democrats up by 30 points, 54% to 24% amongst Hispanic registered voters. Now that's getting pretty close to Hillary Clinton's margins back in the 2016-2018 period with Hispanic voters. And that's important, because what's changed since 2018 is that Texas has a higher proportion of Hispanic voters. So if Kamala Harris had been doing these kinds of numbers amongst Hispanics back in 2024, she would have tied in Texas. And that's not all that's changed since 2018. Trump's approval has changed as well, for the worse.
Again, we're looking at the inverse of that. Trump is considerably less popular in Texas, which of course matches what we're seeing nationally, which is that Donald Trump is less popular now than he was at this point in term one.
Also, the approval rating of the Republican candidate has changed since 2018.
Ted Cruz's net favorability was actually plus 7 points in my average polls. Look where Ken Paxton is. The complete inverse of that. He's 7 points underwater.
And so therefore, unsurprisingly, the polling in the race overall has also changed.
Texas Senate polls in May of the election year, when you matched up Beto O'Rourke versus Ted Cruz was up by 7 points. He was clearly ahead. But look at the polling average now when you max up Ken Paxton versus James Talarico. It's actually Talarico that's ahead by 4 points. And Johnny B, I was looking back at every single Texas Senate race that I could find, and at this point in the campaign, James Talarico is polling better than any Democrat in at least 24 years.
In fact, back in 2018, Beto O'Rourke literally never led a single mainstream poll against Ted Cruz, not one. But this year, it's Ken Paxton who hasn't led a single mainstream general election Senate poll since January. So you can see why Democrats are excited and Republicans are desperate to throw mud at Talarico as soon as possible. And it's not just the clips that John already played. There's heaps more. These two quotes here are getting a big run.
God is non-binary. There are many more than two biological sexes. In fact, there are 6.
That was Ken Paxton's creepy music, not ours. You may have noticed that all of these quotes, by the way, are quite old. Talarico 3 to 6 years ago ran much more to the left than he does now. So he basically has already renounced those two statements.
There are some statements that I've made that I certainly regret. There are statements that I've made where I've missed the mark. I'll be the first to admit that. But Ken Paxton is intentionally clipping my cringy comments to distract from his career of corruption.
But the old grab that's causing Talarico the most headaches has to be this one here, also from 2022.
But also, it's, as all of you know, necessary to fight climate change. It is now existential that we try to reduce our meat consumption and that we try to respect animals in all aspects of society. And so I am proud to say that our campaign has officially become a non-meat campaign. So we are only buying vegan products from our local vegan businesses.
And when that clip was resurfaced earlier in the year, Ted Cruz immediately responded with the very reasonable and not at all desperate response, "Watch! This freak wants to ban barbecue! That's not Texas!" Trump smelled blood, and so he used the attack as well.
He's a vegan, all of a sudden he's not a vegan. He was a vegan, now all of a sudden he's not. Texas doesn't like vegans.
And before you knew it, some people were obsessed with the topic.
Now, the major factor in this race, Greg, is whether Talarico's vegan.
Is that so? That meant Talarico was forced to play defense on this.
Say you're a vegan. I'm not a vegan. I'm an 8th generation Texan. I've been eating barbecue since before Ken Paxton's first indictment. And this campaign basically runs on Texas barbecue. If all they have is lying about me being a vegan, I feel pretty good about our chances this November.
That's, John, how you make a campaign, not about your incredibly corrupt candidate.
Yeah, all the important issues. Meanwhile, Talarico's campaign posted this presumably tongue-in-cheek image of him wearing a Texas flag shirt and eating himself some tasty, tasty barbecue in response to those claims that he's some tofu-eating vegan. Then Republican Senator Mike Lee posted this rather childish AI clip. Thanks for that, Senator. Meanwhile, back on Fox News, Jesse Waters was plumbing new depths of inanity.
He's also 37 and not married. Let's get into this. He says just recently that he has a girlfriend. and they've been together for 4 years.
Jesse then went on to say that he thinks that girlfriend is probably made up, implying what exactly? Maybe his guest, Stephen Miller, can spell it out for us a little more clearly.
When Talarico goes in for a blood test, when he gets a physical, blood doesn't come out. Instead, soy milk comes out. This man has less testosterone than Jasmine Crockett.
Jasmine Crockett was Talarico's primary rival. She is, of course, African-American. So in that clip, Stephen Miller managed to be sexist, homophobic, transphobic and racist all in just 12 seconds. This is one
ugly fuck
of an election, and the stakes are very high. Potential control of the US Senate for the next 2 years.
For those who think John was being a little unfair before to Jesse Watters, because Watters never explicitly questioned the existence of Talarico's girlfriend, he wasn't being unfair.
Basically what I'm saying is, does she exist?
That's blunt. And that segment got a lot worse from there.
Paxton and Cornyn, I want to see them reconcile after what Cornyn said about Paxton.
Well, Cornyn said
those
last night that he's like, I'm on board. He's like, I'll get behind it.
I've heard that before. We'll see.
We'll see.
I think James Talarico has heard I'll get behind it before. From Democrats in the state of Texas who are very excited about his candidacy.
They'll say, but he's a seminarian. How dare you not?
He put the semen in seminarian as in naval, because if he were a Navy SEAL, it would help.
Oh dear. That, by the way, is the highest rating news show on cable TV. So let's be clear about what's going on here. For about 4 decades, Republicans have, wherever possible, feminised male Democrats and butched up female Democrats. And they do it because it works. This arguably started back in 1988 when Mike Dukakis ran against George H.W. Bush and was made an absolute laughingstock because of a photo shoot where he wore this silly helmet with his name on it. It ended up being immortalised in this iconic ad.
He even criticised our rescue mission to Grenada and our strike on Libya. And now he wants to be our commander-in-chief. America can't afford that risk.
The feminisation of Mike Dukakis ended up destroying his campaign, and clearly Talarico was fearing the same result because he had until now insisted on keeping his girlfriend's identity secret for her own privacy. But after a couple of days of gay jokes, well, the campaign gave up and they revealed her identity as well as the fact that she actually is vegan. Now, is that going to help Talarico, or is that just going to encourage more mockery? We'll find out. But what I do know is that James Talarico is not Mike Dukakis, and he is not above fighting back a little bit dirty.
Paxton, your opponent, has taken to calling you Talafrico.
Well, I think if Ken Paxton is worried about freaks, he should stop giving Epstein-style sweetheart deals to pedophiles. You know, this is the guy who just released Adam Hoffman from jail and admitted child rapist after one of Ken Paxton's wealthy lawyer friends got involved in the case. Ken Paxton even kept him off the sex offender registry. Adam Hoffman was supposed to serve 25 years to life, but instead he served less than a month. As of this week, he's now back on our streets because of Ken Paxton's corruption. Ken Paxton is the most corrupt politician in America, and it is costing Texans. It's endangering our children, and it must end.
Now, the plea deal offered by a prosecutor who wasn't Ken Paxton came after there was a mistrial and the victim refused to go through with another trial. So the plea deal actually had nothing to do with Ken Paxton being corrupt. But Talarico has obviously learnt from Dukakis' mistakes, and these seem to be the rules of the game these days, John. It's going to be ugly, all right.
An agreement on extending the ceasefire between the US and Iran remains elusive, with drafts being amended and exchanged, but no final deal. And it was certainly a weird week diplomatically, with the American president not just threatening his enemies, but his allies as well, warning Oman not to join Iran in imposing a toll or regulating crucial shipping lanes through the Strait of Hormuz.
Nobody's going to control it. It's international waters, and Oman will behave just like everybody else, so we'll have to blow them up. They understand that. They'll be fine.
Will they really? That was pretty shocking. The US and Oman are close allies with a relationship stretching back more than 200 years. We'll see how long that lasts. Meanwhile, President Trump was pressuring other Arab allies, including Saudi Arabia, to sign the Abraham Accords, recognising Israel as a part of a final peace mega deal. prompting this suggestion from Republican Senator Lindsey Graham.
They should change the Nobel Prize to the Trump Prize. If he can do that, and I think he can, it's the biggest change in the history, in the modern history, and in the ancient history of the Mideast.
And maybe that makes sense. After all, the founder of the prize, Alfred Nobel, was the inventor of dynamite and gelignite and was also famous for blowing things up. Meanwhile, there are growing signs that Trump's next target for attempted regime change may be Cuba, which is less than 150 kilometres from the president's home state of Florida.
So, I mean, look, I've been hearing about Cuba since I'm a little boy. They've been saying, what's going on with Cuba? And I think we'll be turning it. It's, I think they're going to have to come to us. It's a failed nation. It's a totally failed nation.
Last month, the Trump administration indicted 94-year-old former Cuban President Raul Castro, alleging a conspiracy to kill US nationals and other crimes. This is all over the 1996 downing of 2 planes between Cuba and Florida. The Cuban government took that indictment and the possibility that the US might attack and arrest Castro, much as they did President Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela in January, very seriously indeed.
And the Cuban government is reportedly handing out pamphlets to citizens titled Family Guide for Protection Against Military Aggression. The text warns that the US is threatening a military assault to, quote, annihilate the dream of Fidel Castro.
Meanwhile, the Cuban people have endured days-long blackouts and critical fuel shortages as the nation's power grid crumbles, worsened by the US war with Iran and American sanctions against Cuba. And US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, whose parents left Cuba before the communist takeover of the island in 1959, seems to be laying the groundwork for a possible US invasion.
Cuba not only has weapons that they've acquired from Russia and China over the years, but they also host Russia and Chinese intelligence presence in their country, not far from where we're standing right now. So Cuba has always posed a national security threat to the United States. They, by the way, have been one of the leading sponsors of terrorism in the entire region.
And reports this week suggest the Pentagon has spent months positioning the troops and weapons needed for the US to launch a military attack on Cuba. All it needs is a final go-ahead from Donald Trump. So, yet again, Chaz, we're left to wonder, what is Trump going to do next?
I'm not sure Trump knows. A few months back, he seemed super cocky about Cuba.
I do believe I'll be having the honor of taking Cuba. That'd be good. That's a big honor.
Taking Cuba.
Taking Cuba in some form, yeah. Taking Cuba. I mean, whether I free it, take it, I think I could do anything I want with it. You want to know the truth?
But things have sure changed since then. See if this dynamic sounds familiar to you. This is from a supposed White House insider saying the initial idea on Cuba was apparently that Cuba's leadership was weak and that the combination of the oil blockade and the US military proving its superiority would scare the Cubans into making a deal. But the Cubans are proving much tougher than originally thought. So now America might have to do something drastic if they want to get Cuba's attention. All sounding pretty Iranian to me, also ominous. And also ominous is what analysts have been saying might happen if Trump doesn't commit to a full rebuild of any damage he might cause in Cuba. They say Cuba will require massive private sector investment, but US businesses are wary, and without their involvement, Cuba could become a dangerously impoverished and ungovernable country of roughly 10 million people situated 90 miles south of Florida. Yikes. So I'm hoping that Trump's putting more thought into what he does in Cuba than he seemed to put into what he was going to do in Iran.
Yeah, fingers crossed. For more, we spoke to Cuban exile, pro-democracy activist and author, Dr. Orlando Gutierrez Boronat. Orlando, welcome to Planet America. What is your sense? How desperate are things becoming in Cuba? What's been the impact of these rolling blackouts?
Cubans are seeing now an increase in the energy failure they have suffered for decades. Even when I was a child in Cuba, I remember the frequent blackouts. It's important to understand that in 1959, Cuba had probably the most efficient, most effective electrical industry in Latin America. I can cite statistics about that ad nauseum. The country fell into this energy crisis, these constant blackouts, as a result of poor central planning for the electrical industry, poor maintenance, and a lot of corruption. So Cubans understand that this energy failure is not just an energy failure, it's the result of the failure of dogmatic, communist, centralized planning which has victimized the country.
When you add in the extra blockading elements from this year, do you feel that it's brought the regime any closer to collapsing, or are they just as dug in as they were before?
The energy situation the regime is facing has made repression a lot more difficult for the regime. It's made a lot more difficult for their military, for their paramilitary to move around the country. That's why you have almost 60 continuous days of street protests in Havana and other parts of the country. People are going to the streets more effectively because the regime has a harder time showing up and rounding them up. So that definitely does bring the regime closer to collapse and Cubans closer to regaining their freedoms and liberties.
And what do you think the US administration might be planning for Cuba? Are they thinking in terms of possibly a Venezuela-style decapitation attack or snatch and grab, or maybe a full-scale invasion? Or could the Cuban regime just collapse on its own?
No, I don't think any regime collapses just in and of itself. A regime, no matter how weak, collapses when there are sufficient social pressures that bring about change. The engine of change is the constant resistance of the Cuban people. There are over 1,000 political prisoners in Cuba, probably a lot more than that. And it's the result of this ongoing defiance of communist rule. The real story is that during these 67 years, almost 70 years of communist dictatorship, Cubans have risen repeatedly against this regime. Starting in 2021, these protests became larger than ever. People took to the streets simultaneously. The regime has tottered and has been on the brink of collapse. And that resistance from the people for change is the engine of change. I think U.S. measures are possible because of that resistance inside Cuba. And I think that what the U.S. is trying to accomplish here is a maximum pressure campaign that isolates the regime internationally, that fosters the breakdown of internal regime unity, and moreover, that supports Cuban civil society in its drive, in its effort to bring about a transformation of Cuban politics where the dictatorship ends and Cubans can take control over their individual and collective lives again.
Can I ask, do you trust Donald Trump and Marco Rubio's intentions with Cuba? And also, do you trust their competence?
It's important to understand that by law, the Cuban Liberty Act, which has bipartisan support in Congress, U.S. policy towards Cuba is subordinated to the achievement of democracy and the respect for human rights in the islands. So for the U.S. to really have normal relations with Cuba, that internal change must happen. And this law is very important in guaranteeing Cuba's future independence, sovereignty, and liberty. I think that Marco Rubio is very intelligent, very efficient, very effective. He understands Cuba very well. He's got deep commitment, but he also understands, most importantly, the threat this regime has been to U.S. national security for 67 years. How this regime has worked to undermine the U.S., how it has supported the most radical extremist groups within the U.S. for decades, as well as entered into alliances with rogue regimes around the world and promoted and destabilized communist dictatorship throughout Latin America. I think Donald Trump has a deep bond with the Cuban American community, with the Cuban people. He's had an intense rapport with that community for a long time. He has over and over again repeated the good impression he has of Cuban Americans and their achievement, and of Cuba as a country and what it has achieved. So I think that this president has shown the will to be decisive about Cuba. And certainly the pressure that his administration has exerted on the regime in Cuba is unprecedented. Many prior administrations have put pressure on the regime, none as consistently and as steadfastly as the Trump administration with Marco Rubio as Secretary of State.
Orlando Gutierrez Boronat, thanks for joining us on Planet America.
You guys had great questions. Thank you. It was very interesting to speak with you about it.
And now to the preparations for America's 250th birthday this July, and it's a race against the clock to renovate and refill the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool, which the president is having repainted to match the blue of the American flag and his suits. Trump originally said this pool's facelift would cost under $2 million. That quickly became a $6.9 million no-bid contract, which has since ballooned to over $13 million, so more than 7 times what Trump promised. And experts say this is just a cosmetic job. It won't do anything to stop the leaks from faulty plumbing in its filtration system, amounting to 16 million gallons of wasted water every year. And we might even see a festive green algal bloom come the heat of July, Chaz.
Well, that's what happened when the Obama administration tried to fix the pool. They spent $34 million and they took 2 years to fix the pool up with a new circulation and filtration system, and yet it still leaked and almost immediately had algal blooms. So Maybe they should cut their losses and just call it a reflecting swamp.
It would make sense. Washington, D.C. was once very much a swamp. Among other rushed renos happening at the moment, the Trump administration is spending $5 million to quickly coat some bronze horse statues in gold. While Trump did manage to rip up the historic Rose Garden and replace it with a resort-style patio, sadly, the billion-dollar White House ballroom and the French imperial-style triumphal arch are going to take a little longer to complete. They won't be ready by July. But the 4,000-seat mixed martial arts stadium is well underway on the south lawn of the White House. Happily, that is only temporary, but then again, they did say that about the Eiffel Tower too. The president's other planned celebrations include military demonstrations, the erection of a 110-foot Ferris wheel, and what organisers are calling the Great American State Fair. This is how President Trump has been spruiking that.
Frankly, you'll never see anything like it, and you'll never see anything like it again.
Let's hope not, because last week organisers unveiled what could generously be described as an eclectic lineup of forgotten, lesser-known or presumed dead performers.
The acts were revealed today. They include Martina McBride, Vanilla Ice, Milli Vanilli, Bret Michaels, and at one point, the lineup was actually trending on social media.
Yeah, trending because nobody could quite believe that they had booked a German pop duo who won a Grammy in 1990 before it was revealed that they were a couple of dancers who were lip-syncing to actual singers. And if that wasn't bad enough...
Milli Vanilli announced they are not performing and were, quote, shocked to see their name on the lineup.
This is a schmozzle, Chaz. Others have pulled out too. Young MC, Martina McBride, the Commodores, Morris Day, all of them saying we're going to give it a miss. It's become too political. Meanwhile, Milli Vanilli's one surviving original frontman says he's in fact available and he even sings now.
And that means the performing bill now looks a bit more like this. What is he doing? Donald, listen to me. I know you watch the show. You know you've got Kid Rock. You know you've got Lee Greenwood. You know you've got Carrie Underwood. You got these kids as well.
Over here, USA. Over there, USA. Freedom and liberty everywhere. Oh, say can you see it's not so easy.
All of them are better than Vanilla Ice, Flow Rider, and half of Milli Vanilli. So cut your losses, mate.
Good point. In another setback, a DC District Court judge this week has ruled that the Kennedy Center Board, appointed by President Trump, overstepped its statutory bounds by unilaterally renaming the Kennedy Center after President Trump. So Trump now has 2 weeks to remove his name from the Kennedy Center building and the signage around the facility, although his appointees are examining an appeal. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is pushing ahead with a plan to put the president's head on a newly minted $250 bill. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent is backing the move.
I don't think that there's anything untoward about having the President of the United States, the person who was President of the United States, on the 250th anniversary bill.
Anything untoward about it is it's illegal. It's not up to him, though. It is up to Congress to change an 1860s law that prevents a living person being on any US currency. And it has happened before. 100 years ago, a $50 coin, 50-cent coin, was minted commemorating America's 150th anniversary. On one side was a profile image of the father of the nation, George Washington. Behind him in profile was the living incumbent president, Calvin Coolidge. But that did require a specific law, passed in 1925, more than a year before the sesquicentennial celebrations. But history has a warning for President Trump even so. 1 million of those Washington Coolidge coins were minted, but buying a $50 for $1 didn't seem like a great deal to many Americans, and in the end, over 850,000 of them went unsold. They were returned to the mint and melted down. And while all of that is going on, President Trump is again suggesting his head should appear on Mount Rushmore alongside Washington, Jefferson, Roosevelt and Lincoln, posting this image on his social media site on the weekend. Bad news again for President Trump, though. The original sculptor of that dismissed the idea of a fifth head back in the 1930s because he said he'd used up all of the appropriate granite on the mountain. Writing at the time, I doubt if it would be possible. And that is all for another trip to Planet America. We'll see you back here on ABC TV at the same time next week, or anytime you like on ABC iView, YouTube and Facebook.
And this week on PEP, the Planet Extra podcast, we're talking Talarico and Paxton, the Pope on AI, and the most undercovered story about a dodgy DOJ. See you there.
Bye-bye.